The words hit me like a slap across the face during what was supposed to be a family celebration. "She's obviously just using him to climb the social ladder," Margaret Richardson whispered to her sister-in-law, not realizing I was standing right behind them in the kitchen. "I mean, look at her background compared to our family's legacy." The irony was so thick you could cut it with the carving knife sitting on the counter. If only they knew that their precious son's medical school tuition, all $280,000 of it, was coming directly from my trust fund. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen-Williams, and I should probably start by explaining how I ended up in the most awkward Thanksgiving dinner of my life. It all began 2 years earlier when I met Dr. James Richardson at a charity gala in Boston. Not the kind of charity event where people write small checks and call it philanthropy. This was the real deal. A fundraiser for pediatric cancer research that I had personally organized and funded through my family's foundation. James was there as a second-year medical student, volunteering his time to help with the auction. I noticed him immediately, not because he was devastatingly handsome, though he was, but because he was the only person there who seemed genuinely interested in the cause, rather than the networking opportunities. While other attendees schmooze around the open bar, James was crouched down talking to 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, one of our foundation's scholarship recipients, showing her how a stethoscope worked with the patience of someone who truly understood what it meant to care for others. I approached him under the pretense of thanking volunteers, but really I was intrigued by his authenticity. "You're really good with her," I said, watching as Emma giggled at something he whispered. He looked up, and I was struck by the sincerity in his dark brown eyes. "She's remarkable. Did you know she wants to be a doctor too? Says she wants to help other kids like her." He smiled, the kind of smile that reaches your eyes and makes you forget you're at a formal event. "I'm James, by the way." "James Richardson." "Sarah," I replied, deliberately omitting my last name. The Chen-Williams name opened doors, but it also changed how people treated me. I wanted to know who James was when he thought I was just another volunteer. Wah. We talked for hours that night. He told me about growing up in a middle-class family in Connecticut, how his father was a high school history teacher, and his mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital. His passion for medicine stemmed from watching his younger sister battle leukemia when she was 7. She'd won the fight, but the experience had shaped his entire worldview. I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed with anyone: the pressure of carrying on my family's philanthropic legacy, the challenge of being taken seriously in business when people assumed your success was inherited rather than earned, the loneliness that came with never being sure if people liked you for who you were or what you represented. "You know what's funny?" James said as the evening wound down, loosening his borrowed tie. He'd mentioned earlier that his roommate had lent it to him for the event. "I came here thinking I'd just be moving chairs and handing out programs. I never expected to meet someone who actually gets why this matters." I gave him my personal cell number that night, not my assistant's line that filtered through to my calendar. For our first date, he suggested a small Italian place in the North End that he swore had the best cannoli in Boston. It was the kind of restaurant where the owner knew everyone's name and the tables were so close together you could hear your neighbors' conversations. It was perfect. For 3 months, we existed in a beautiful bubble where my last name didn't matter. James knew I worked for a nonprofit, technically true, since the Chen-Williams Foundation was indeed a registered nonprofit organization. He knew I was comfortable financially, hard to hide when I insisted on paying for dinners and had season tickets to the Boston Symphony. But he didn't know the full extent of what comfortable meant in my world. The Chen-Williams family had built their fortune in technology and real estate over 3 generations. My grandfather, David Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1950s and built a small electronics business that eventually became one of the largest suppliers of medical equipment on the East Coast. When he married my grandmother, Elizabeth Williams, whose family had old Boston money dating back to the shipping industry, they combined their resources and business acumen to create something extraordinary. By the time my father inherited the businesses, the Chen-Williams portfolio included everything from biotech startups to luxury real estate developments. The foundation alone had an endowment of over $200 million, and that was just what we allocated for charitable giving. Our family's total worth was something I rarely thought about in concrete numbers. It was simply the backdrop of my existence. I had earned my MBA from Harvard, not because I needed to work, but because I believed in using privilege responsibly. At 28, I served as the Foundation's Director of Strategic Initiatives, overseeing educational scholarships, medical research grants, and community development projects. It was meaningful work, but it also meant that every aspect of my life was scrutinized, analyzed, and often reduced to my bank account, rather than my actual contributions. The bubble burst on a rainy Tuesday in March when James picked me up at my apartment for dinner. I had deliberately chosen a modest 2-bedroom in Back Bay, comfortable but not ostentatious. What I hadn't considered was that my building's concierge would greet me by my full name as we walked through the lobby. "Good evening, Miss Chen-Williams," Harold said with his usual warm smile. "Your father called earlier about the board meeting tomorrow." I felt James's steps falter beside me, but I pretended not to notice, hoping we could make it to the restaurant before the inevitable questions began. We managed exactly half a block. "Chen-Williams," James said slowly, stopping under a streetlight. "As in the Chen-Williams Foundation? The Chen-Williams Medical Center? The Chen-Williams Scholarship Program?" There was no point in deflecting anymore. "Yes," I said simply, meeting his gaze directly. He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture I'd learned meant he was processing something significant. "Sarah, the Chen-Williams Foundation sponsored my undergraduate research project. Your family's scholarship program is literally how I'm paying for medical school right now." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man I'd fallen for was already connected to my world in the most fundamental way possible, and neither of us had known it. "James, Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. But his tone wasn't accusatory. If anything, he sounded hurt. "Did you think I was the kind of person who would treat you differently?" The truth was complicated. Yes, I had worried he might treat me differently, but I'd also treasured those months of being seen for who I was, rather than what I represented. "I wanted you to know me first," I admitted, "before you knew about all of this." We talked until nearly midnight that night, sitting in his beat-up Honda Civic, because it was the only private space available. James shared his fears about accepting the scholarship, wondering if he truly deserved it or if there were others more qualified. I told him about the rigorous selection process, how his essay about his sister's cancer journey had moved the entire review committee to tears, how his academic achievements and community service record had made him a unanimous choice. "So you've known this whole time that I'm basically living off your family's generosity," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "No," I corrected gently. "You're living off your own merit. The foundation just provides the opportunity. What you do with it is entirely up to you." That conversation deepened our relationship in ways I hadn't expected. James began to understand the weight of responsibility I carried, the constant awareness that every decision affected not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of scholarship recipients, research projects, and community programs. I came to appreciate his perspective on receiving aid, the combination of gratitude and determination that drove him to excel not just for himself but for everyone who had invested in his future. Our relationship evolved from casual dating to something much more serious. James met my parents 6 months later at a foundation fundraiser, and they were immediately charmed by his genuine passion for medicine and his humble appreciation for the opportunities he'd been given. My father, typically reserved with my boyfriends, spent an hour discussing healthcare policy with James, and came away impressed by his thoughtful insights. By our first anniversary, James had become a fixture in my life in the best possible way. He studied at my apartment when his roommates were too loud, joined me for foundation events when he could spare the time from his brutal medical school schedule, and somehow managed to make me feel like the most important thing in his world, despite the demanding nature of his studies. It was James who suggested I should meet his family. "They're gonna love you," he assured me as we planned a weekend trip to Connecticut. "Mom's been asking about you for months, and Dad wants to know if you're the reason I've been so happy lately." What he didn't mention, what I don't think he fully understood at the time, was the expectations his family had developed about who he would eventually marry. The Richardsons weren't wealthy, but they were proud people with deep roots in their community. James's father, Robert Richardson, had taught at the same high school for 25 years and coached the debate team to 3 state championships. His mother, Margaret, had been the head nurse in the pediatric ward at their local hospital for over 2 decades. They were good people, respected in their community, but they occupied a very different world from mine. A world where success was measured in years of service, community impact, and the respect of your neighbors rather than stock portfolios and foundation endowments. A world where a young woman dating their son would logically come from a similar background, maybe a teacher, a nurse, someone from a family they could easily understand and relate to. I should have realized that my relationship with James represented more than just young love to his family. James was their success story, their brilliant son, who had earned his way into medical school and was on track to become everything they had dreamed for him. In their minds, he deserved someone equally accomplished but from their world, someone who would appreciate the significance of his achievements because she had traveled a similar path. Instead, they were going to meet me. And despite James's assurances, despite my genuine desire to connect with the people who had raised the man I loved, I had a sinking feeling that Thanksgiving dinner with the Richardson family was going to be far more complicated than either of us anticipated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Richardson family home sat on a tree-lined street in Westport, Connecticut. The kind of neighborhood where American flags hung from front porches, and neighbors still borrowed cups of sugar from each other. As James pulled his Honda into the driveway behind a well-maintained but clearly older Subaru Outback, I took in the modest 2-story colonial, with its neat flower beds and hand-painted mailbox reading, "The Richardsons, Estain, 1987. It was charming in a way that money couldn't buy, genuine, lived in, filled with the kind of memories that come from staying in one place long enough to watch trees grow and children graduate. The contrast to my family's estate in Beacon Hill, with its historical significance and carefully curated perfection, was striking but not unwelcome. "Nervous?" James asked, squeezing my hand as we sat in the car for a moment. "A little," I admitted, though that was an understatement. I had dressed carefully for this first meeting. Designer jeans that looked casual but cost more than most people spent on their entire wardrobe, paired with a simple cashmere sweater and understated jewelry. I wanted to look approachable while still being true to myself, but I was increasingly aware that understated in my world might still seem ostentatious in theirs. The front door opened before we could knock, revealing a woman who was unmistakably James's mother. Margaret Richardson had the same dark hair, though hers was streaked with silver and pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the same warm brown eyes that had first drawn me to her son. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon characters. She must have just come from her shift at the hospital. "James!" she exclaimed, pulling him into a fierce hug that spoke of a mother's love and worry for her child living 3 hours away. "You look thin. Are you eating enough?" "Mom, I'm fine," he laughed, the sound comfortable and familiar. "I want you to meet Sarah. Sarah, this is my mother, Margaret Richardson." Margaret turned to me with a smile that seemed genuine, though I caught her taking in my appearance with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to reading people. "Sarah, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. James talks about you constantly." "It's lovely to meet you too, Mrs. Richardson," I replied, accepting her warm handshake. "Thank you for having me." "Oh, please call me Margaret. And we're thrilled you could come." She ushered us inside, chattering about the drive from Boston and whether we'd hit traffic. The interior of the house was exactly what I'd expected. Comfortable furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than fashion. Family photos covering every available surface, and the lingering aroma of something delicious baking in the kitchen. Robert Richardson emerged from what appeared to be a home office. A tall man with graying hair and the kind of presence that suggested he commanded respect in his classroom. He wore khakis and a polo shirt with the high school's logo, and his handshake was firm when James introduced us. "Sarah, welcome to our home," he said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to speaking to large groups. "James tells us you work in nonprofit management. That's admirable work." "Thank you," I replied, grateful that James had kept my job description vague. "I find it very fulfilling." The first few hours went smoothly. We sat in the living room drinking coffee while Margaret peppered James with questions about his studies, his health, and whether he was making time for sleep between clinical rotations. Robert asked me thoughtful questions about nonprofit work in general, the challenges of funding, the satisfaction of seeing programs succeed, the balance between idealism and practical results. I found myself genuinely enjoying their company. Margaret's stories about her pediatric patients were both heartwarming and heartbreaking, and her obvious dedication to her work reminded me why our foundation prioritized healthcare initiatives. Robert's passion for education was infectious. He spoke about his students with the kind of pride typically reserved for one's own children, and his insights into public education funding challenges aligned perfectly with several of our foundation's current projects. But I also noticed the subtle ways they were assessing me. Margaret's questions about my background were casual but persistent. Where had I grown up? What did my parents do? Where had I gone to school? When I mentioned Harvard, I saw her and Robert exchange a quick glance that suggested surprise, mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. Harvard Business School, Robert mused. That's quite an achievement. Your parents must be very proud. They are, I said simply, not elaborating on the fact that multiple generations of Chen-Williams family members had attended Harvard, or that there was a lecture hall named after my grandfather. The real test came when James's sister Emma arrived for dinner with her boyfriend Tyler. Emma was a senior at UConn studying nursing, clearly following in her mother's footsteps, and she had inherited the family's warm personality along with James's sharp intelligence. Tyler was a pleasant young man studying accounting, and it was immediately clear that he and Emma were serious about each other. "So Sarah," Emma said as we helped Margaret set the table, "James mentioned you live in Boston. Do you have roommates?" "No, I live alone," I replied, not mentioning that my apartment was a luxury 2-bedroom that cost more per month than many people earned annually. "Lucky," Emma laughed. "I can't wait to afford my own place. Between student loans and everything else, I figure I'll be living with roommates until I'm 30. The casual mention of student loans created an awkward moment where I realized just how different our financial realities were. Emma was clearly worried about debt in a way that had never been a concern for me, and her assumption that this was a universal experience among young adults highlighted the gap in our backgrounds. Margaret called us to dinner, and we gathered around a dining room table that was clearly the heart of the Richardson home. The table itself was beautiful, solid wood that showed the nicks and scratches of decades of family meals, and it was set with china that had obviously been saved for special occasions. The meal was incredible. Margaret had prepared a feast that showcased both her cooking skills and her understanding of what comfort food should be: pot roast with vegetables, homemade rolls, green bean casserole, and an apple pie that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. It was the kind of meal that spoke of tradition, of recipes passed down through generations, of love expressed through the simple act of feeding people you cared about. The conversation during dinner revealed more about the family dynamics and their expectations for James's future. Robert talked proudly about James's academic achievements, but there was an underlying current of amazement that never quite faded, as if he still couldn't quite believe that his son had made it into medical school, that this working-class family had produced someone destined for such professional heights. "We always knew James was special," Margaret said, passing the rolls around the table. "Even in elementary school, his teachers would tell us he was gifted. But medical school..." She shook her head with wonder. "Sometimes I can't believe our boy is going to be a doctor." "He's going to be an excellent doctor," I said sincerely. "He has such natural empathy, and his dedication to his studies is incredible." "The studying is the easy part," Robert chimed in. "It's everything else that worries us. The financial pressure, the stress, the competition. Medical school changes people sometimes." There was something in the way he said it that made me look up from my plate. Robert was watching me carefully, and I had the distinct impression that his comment wasn't really about James's studies. It was about whether success would change James's values, his connection to his family, his understanding of where he came from. "James hasn't changed at all," I said carefully. "If anything, medical school has made him more committed to helping people. He talks about his patients constantly, and he's always thinking about how to provide better care, especially for underserved communities." This seemed to reassure Robert somewhat, but I caught another one of those meaningful glances between him and Margaret. It was becoming clear that they were concerned about more than just James's academic success. They were worried about losing him to a world they didn't understand, a world where their values and their way of life might seem small or insignificant. "Tyler," Emma's boyfriend, inadvertently highlighted these concerns when he mentioned his own career aspirations. "I'm hoping to get hired by one of the big accounting firms in Hartford after graduation," he said. "The starting salary isn't huge, but it's good work and I'd be close to family." "That sounds perfect," Margaret said approvingly. "There's something to be said for staying close to home, building a life near the people who matter most." The subtext was impossible to miss. Tyler represented the kind of future they understood and approved of. Local, stable, connected to community and family. His relationship with Emma fit their expectations because it was built on shared backgrounds and similar aspirations. My relationship with James, on the other hand, represented something unknown and potentially threatening. I lived in Boston, 3 hours away from the family James clearly adored. My job, while admirable in principle, was vaguely defined and apparently well compensated enough that I could afford to live alone in an expensive city. I had attended an elite university that none of them had even visited. In their minds, I probably represented everything that could pull James away from his roots. Sophistication that might make him embarrassed by his humble beginnings, opportunities that might take him far from Connecticut, a lifestyle that might make their family gatherings seem provincial by comparison. The irony, of course, was that James's education, the very thing that was allowing him to build the career they were so proud of, was being funded by my family's foundation. But they didn't know that, and I was beginning to realize that the truth would be even more complicated than their current concerns. After dinner, Margaret insisted on showing me photo albums spanning James's entire life. We sat on the couch while she narrated his journey from a chubby-cheeked toddler to a serious young man in his medical school white coat. The photos told the story of a family that might not have had much money, but was rich in love and support. "This is from his high school graduation," Margaret said, pointing to a picture of James in his cap and gown, flanked by his beaming parents. "We were so proud. He was valedictorian, you know, first in his family to go to college." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, but there was also something else, a hint of protective fierceness that suggested she would fight anyone who didn't appreciate what an achievement that represented. In her mind, James's success was proof that their values, their upbringing, their way of life, had produced something extraordinary. Any woman in his life needed to understand and respect that. As the evening wound down and we prepared to head to our hotel, I found myself genuinely fond of James's family, but also acutely aware of the expectations and concerns swirling beneath the surface of their hospitality. They were good people who loved their son and wanted the best for him, but their definition of best might not include a girlfriend whose background was so different from their own. "We should do this again soon," Margaret said as she hugged me goodbye. "Maybe next time you can stay longer. Really get to know each other." "I'd love that," I replied, meaning it despite my growing unease about future visits. As we drove to our hotel, James was practically glowing with happiness. "See? I told you they'd love you. Mom was already asking when we'd be back." I smiled and squeezed his hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the Richardson family's acceptance was more conditional than James realized. They were willing to like me as long as I fit into their understanding of who James should be with, as long as I didn't represent a threat to the values and connections they held dear. What they didn't know yet was that I wasn't just some wealthy girlfriend who might lead their son astray. I was the person ensuring their son could pursue his dreams without the crushing debt that had derailed so many other promising medical students. I was already more invested in James's success than they could possibly imagine. But somehow, I suspected that when they eventually learned the truth, it would only make everything more complicated. The months following my first visit to the Richardson family home passed in a delicate dance of increasing intimacy and growing tension. James had been accepted for a prestigious surgical rotation at Massachusetts General Hospital, which meant longer hours but also incredible opportunities to work with some of the most renowned surgeons in the country. His excitement was infectious, but it also meant our time together became even more precious and carefully scheduled. What I didn't anticipate was how his family would interpret his success through the lens of our relationship. The first hint came during a phone call I accidentally overheard when James was talking to his mother while studying at my apartment. He had put the call on speaker, assuming I was in the shower, but I had finished early and was standing in the bedroom doorway, frozen by what I was hearing. I'm just concerned, honey. Margaret's voice carried clearly through the phone. You're working so hard, and I know Sarah is supportive, but sometimes I wonder if you're pushing yourself extra hard to keep up with her lifestyle. Mom, what do you mean? James asked, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what she meant. I mean, she's clearly from a very different world than us, sweetheart. The clothes she wears, the way she talks about traveling, that apartment of hers. It's wonderful that you've found someone successful, but I just hope you're not feeling pressured to be something you're not. I quietly retreated to the bathroom, my heart sinking as I processed what I'd heard. Margaret wasn't being malicious. Her concern for her son was genuine. But she was operating under assumptions that were both wrong and increasingly problematic. In her mind, I was some sort of high-maintenance girlfriend who required James to stretch beyond his means to impress me. The reality was exactly the opposite. I was the one constantly suggesting low-key activities because I treasured the simple moments we shared. When James had mentioned wanting to take me somewhere special for our anniversary, I had suggested a picnic in the public garden rather than an expensive restaurant. When he'd stressed about not being able to afford a weekend getaway, I had proposed camping in New Hampshire, something I'd never done but was eager to try with him. But I was beginning to understand that my attempts to accommodate his budget might be seen as patronizing rather than considerate. The fact that I could easily afford the expensive restaurants while suggesting alternatives might seem like I was humoring him rather than genuinely preferring his company over luxury experiences. The situation became more complicated when James's financial aid package was reviewed for his third year. He came home from the financial aid office looking shell-shocked, clutching a folder full of documents. What's wrong? I asked immediately, setting aside the foundation grant applications I'd been reviewing. They're reducing my scholarship, he said, sinking onto the couch beside me. The Chen-Williams Foundation scholarship was supposed to cover all 4 years, but apparently there's been some kind of administrative change. They're cutting it by 40% starting next semester. My blood ran cold. There had been no administrative change. I would have been the first to know about any modifications to our scholarship programs. This meant someone in our administrative office had made an error, or worse, someone was deliberately interfering with James's funding. Let me see the paperwork, I said, trying to keep my voice calm while my mind raced through the possibilities. As I reviewed the documents, the problem became clear. James's scholarship had been flagged for review because someone had noted, quote, significant change in personal circumstances on his file. The notation was dated just 2 weeks after I'd been photographed attending a high-profile charity auction with him, an event that had been covered in the Boston Globe's Society pages. Someone had seen that photo, recognized my name, connected me to the foundation, and made the assumption that James no longer needed financial assistance because he was dating someone wealthy. The bureaucratic machinery had kicked into motion without anyone bothering to investigate whether James was actually receiving financial support from me. I was furious, but I was also trapped. I couldn't simply call the foundation office and fix the problem without revealing my identity to James in a way that would raise more questions than it answered. And I couldn't let him take on crushing debt because of an administrative error that was ultimately caused by my public presence in his life. This is insane, James said, running his hands through his hair. I haven't changed anything about my financial situation. If anything, things are tighter because of all the extra expenses for the surgical rotation. We'll figure it out, I said, though I wasn't sure how. There has to be an appeals process. Sarah, this is 40% of my tuition. That's over $30,000 a year. I can't just figure out that kind of money. His voice was strained with a stress I'd never heard before. I'll have to take out private loans, and the interest rates. God, I'll be paying this off for decades. I watched the man I loved spiral into panic over a problem I could solve with a single phone call, and I felt like the worst kind of fraud. Here he was, worrying about debt that would haunt him for years, while I was sitting on a trust fund that could cover his entire medical school tuition without making a dent in my monthly interest earnings. Let me make some calls, I said carefully. I have some connections in the nonprofit world. Maybe I can find out what happened, see if there's a way to appeal this decision. James looked at me with desperate hope. Would you? I mean, I know it's not your problem, but if you think there's a chance, of course I will, I said, hating myself for the deception, even as I planned exactly how I would fix this mess. The next morning, I called Patricia Webb, the director of our scholarship programs, from my office at the foundation. Patricia had worked with our family for over 15 years, and I trusted her discretion completely. Sarah, I was wondering when you'd call about this, she said as soon as I explained the situation. The Richardson file has been flagged because someone in our intake department saw the society page photo and assumed he was receiving financial support from you personally. That's ridiculous, I said, though I had to admire the irony. James has no idea who I am in relation to the foundation. He thinks I'm just a non-profit employee who might have some connections. Well, that's about to become a problem, Patricia warned. The review committee is meeting next week, and unless Mr. Richardson can provide documentation proving his financial situation hasn't changed, they're going to uphold the reduction. They'll want bank statements, tax returns, proof that he's not receiving outside support. I closed my eyes, seeing the trap I'd walked into. If James provided the requested documentation, it would show that his financial situation was exactly the same as when he'd first applied for the scholarship. But it would also show that he was telling the truth about not receiving support from me, which would expose the foundation's error and potentially lead to questions about why his file had been flagged in the first place. Patricia, I need you to quietly kill this review, I said. Find a procedural reason, blame it on administrative confusion, whatever it takes. James Richardson deserves that scholarship based on his merit, and his personal relationships are none of our business. I can do that, she said slowly. But Sarah, this is going to keep happening. As long as you're publicly associated with him, someone's going to notice the connection. And if your relationship becomes more serious. She didn't need to finish the thought. If James and I got engaged, if we got married, the scrutiny would intensify exponentially. The foundation couldn't be seen as providing scholarships to family members, even if the scholarship had been awarded long before the relationship began. Let me worry about that, I said. For now, just fix this quietly. Consider it done. But Sarah? You're going to have to tell him eventually. The longer you wait, the more complicated this becomes. I hung up knowing she was right, but also knowing that the timing couldn't be worse. James was already stressed about his surgical rotation, already worried about finances, already dealing with pressure from his family about our relationship. Adding the revelation that I'd been essentially lying to him about my identity for over a year would be devastating. I decided to wait until after his rotation ended, until he was in a better headspace to handle such a significant conversation. It was a decision I would come to regret. The scholarship issue was resolved within a week. Patricia cited an, quote, administrative error in file processing and restored James's full funding retroactively. James was euphoric with relief, and his gratitude toward my supposed connections was both heartwarming and guilt-inducing. I don't know what you said to whoever you called, he told me over dinner at our favorite little Italian place, but they fixed everything. Full scholarship restored, no appeals process needed. You're amazing. I'm just glad it worked out, I said, unable to meet his eyes. But the stress of the situation had taken its toll on James in ways that weren't immediately apparent. A few days later, during one of our regular phone calls with his family, I heard him mention the scholarship scare to his parents. Their reaction was swift and revealing. Thank goodness Sarah was able to help, Margaret said, though her tone suggested mixed feelings about their son needing assistance from his girlfriend. It just shows you how precarious these things can be, Robert added. One administrative mistake and your whole future could be derailed. It makes you appreciate having connections. The way he said connections made it clear that he was developing theories about my background and influence that weren't entirely comfortable for him. The Richardson family valued self-reliance and hard work above all else. The idea that their son's success might depend on his girlfriend's networking abilities didn't sit well with their worldview. Sarah just made a few phone calls, James said, defending me in a way that broke my heart. She works in the nonprofit sector, so she knows people. It's not like she pulled strings or anything unethical. But I could hear the doubt creeping into his own voice. James was too intelligent not to notice that my casual phone calls had resolved a problem that should have required formal appeals and extensive documentation. He was starting to wonder about the extent of my connections and what that might mean about who I really was. The final straw came when Emma Richardson visited Boston for a nursing conference. James had suggested she stay with us, and I'd agreed enthusiastically, thinking it would be a good opportunity to strengthen my relationship with his family. What I hadn't considered was how my apartment would look through Emma's eyes. She arrived on a Friday afternoon, and I saw her take in the space with undisguised amazement. The high ceilings, the original hardwood floors, the view of the public garden, the custom kitchen that I'd had renovated the previous year, all of it spoke of a level of affluence that was impossible to hide. "This place is incredible," she said, setting her overnight bag in the guest room that was larger than her entire dorm room. "How long have you lived here?" "About 3 years," I replied, not mentioning that I'd bought the apartment outright rather than renting it. Over dinner, Emma's questions became more pointed. She asked about my job, my salary, how I could afford such an expensive apartment on a nonprofit worker's income. I deflected as best I could, but I could see her putting pieces together in ways that were leading to incorrect but damaging conclusions. "You know what's funny?" she said on Saturday morning as we sat drinking coffee on my private balcony overlooking the garden. "James always talks about how down-to-earth you are, how you're not materialistic or anything. But this," she gestured at the apartment, "this is like something from a magazine." "I've been fortunate," I said carefully. "Fortunate? How?" she pressed. "I mean, did you inherit money? Win the lottery? Because normal people don't live like this on non-profit salaries." I could see the exact moment when she reached her conclusion. Her expression shifted from curious to something approaching disapproval, and I realized that whatever she was thinking, it wasn't good. "Emma, what exactly are you suggesting?" She looked uncomfortable but determined. "I'm not suggesting anything, I'm just observing. And what I'm observing is that my brother is dating someone who lives a lifestyle that doesn't match her supposed income. And now suddenly he's getting special treatment with his scholarship applications." The accusation hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. In Emma's mind, I was either independently wealthy and hiding it from James, or I was somehow using James for personal gain. Either way, I was deceptive and potentially harmful to her brother's future. "It's not what you think," I said finally. "Then what is it?" she challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're either lying to James about who you are, or you're using him for something, and either way, that's going to hurt him." She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't right either. And I realized that no matter what I said, no matter how I tried to explain, Emma was going to leave Boston with serious concerns about my relationship with her brother. Concerns she would undoubtedly share with their parents. As she packed her bag on Sunday morning, preparing to return to Connecticut, Emma gave me a look that was part pity, part warning. "James is a good person," she said. "He sees the best in everyone, sometimes to his own detriment. I hope you really care about him, and not just what he represents." After she left, I sat in my beautiful apartment feeling like a fraud. Emma's visit had crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore. The foundation of my relationship with James was built on a fundamental deception. Not because I'd intended to deceive him, but because every day I didn't tell him the truth, the lie grew larger and more damaging. I was the wealthy girlfriend hiding my fortune while watching him struggle with financial concerns I could easily resolve. I was the foundation heir secretly ensuring his scholarship while letting him believe it was his merit alone. I was the woman who claimed to love him while withholding the most basic truth about who I was. And now his family was starting to suspect that something wasn't right. They just had no idea how right they were, or how wrong their assumptions would prove to be. The weeks following Emma's visit felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. James had noticed the shift in his family's attitude toward me, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what had changed. Phone calls that used to include casual questions about my well-being now focused exclusively on his studies and health. When he mentioned our weekend plans or something funny I'd said, the responses were polite but noticeably cooler. "Is everything okay with your family?" I asked one evening as we studied together at my apartment. James was reviewing surgical procedures while I worked on grant proposals for the Foundation's upcoming board meeting. He looked up from his textbook, fatigue evident in his eyes. "I think so. Why?" "They just seem distant lately. Did I do something wrong when Emma visited?" James set down his highlighter and rubbed his temples. Emma asked a lot of questions about you after she got home. About your apartment, your job, how you can afford to live the way you do. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests she thinks there's something you're not telling me. He met my gaze directly. Is there something you're not telling me, Sarah? This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and postponing for months. I could tell him everything right now, explain about the foundation, about my family's wealth, about how none of it changed how I felt about him. But looking at his exhausted face, knowing he had a crucial surgical observation the next morning, I couldn't bring myself to add this burden to his already overwhelming schedule. James, you know who I am, I said carefully. I'm the same person you met at that charity gala, the same person who's been by your side for over a year. If your family has concerns, maybe they should talk to me directly instead of making assumptions. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. James studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, I'll talk to them. But talking to them, as it turned out, only made things worse. The conversation happened the following Sunday during James's weekly check-in call with his parents. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard his voice rise in frustration from the living room. What do you mean, be careful? Careful of what? I couldn't hear Margaret's response, but James's reply was clear enough. That's ridiculous. Sarah has never asked me for anything. If anything, she's the one who's always suggesting we do things that don't cost money. Another pause then. Emma said what? Mom, that's completely unfair. Just because Sarah has a nice apartment doesn't mean she's hiding something sinister. I turned off the stove and moved closer to the doorway, my heart racing. No, I am not being naive, James said, his voice tight with anger. I'm being loyal to someone I care about. And frankly, I'm disappointed that my family would rather speculate about her motives than trust my judgment. The call ended abruptly, and I heard James's phone hit the coffee table with more force than necessary. When I entered the living room, he was staring out the window with his jaw clenched. Bad call? I asked gently. He turned to me, conflict evident in his expression. They think you're hiding something significant about your background. Emma convinced them that your lifestyle doesn't match your supposed income, and now they're worried that I'm being manipulated somehow. The word manipulated hit me like a physical blow. Manipulated how? They won't say exactly, but the implication is that you're either lying about who you are, or you're using our relationship for some kind of personal gain. He ran his hands through his hair. It's insulting, honestly, to both of us. I sat down beside him, my mind racing. What did you tell them? I told them they were wrong, that they don't know you the way I do, and that their suspicions are hurtful and unfounded. He looked at me with such trust and love that I felt physically sick. I told them that unless they can treat you with respect, they won't be seeing much of me. The irony was devastating. James was defending me against accusations that were essentially correct. I was hiding something significant about my background, and our relationship was affecting his financial situation, albeit in ways his family couldn't imagine. His loyalty was touching and terrible because it was based on his belief in my honesty. James, maybe I should talk to them directly, I suggested. Clear the air, answer their questions. Absolutely not, he said firmly. You shouldn't have to defend yourself against baseless suspicions. Either they trust my judgment, or they don't. But Emma wasn't finished gathering evidence for her case against me. 2 weeks later, she called James with information that sent our carefully maintained equilibrium into freefall. I was at the foundation office when James called, his voice tight with confusion and hurt. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, I said, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. Emma did some research. She looked up the Chen-Williams Foundation online, and she found photos from their annual gala last year. Photos that include someone who looks exactly like you, identified as Sarah Chen-Williams, daughter of the foundation's founders. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. I closed my eyes, knowing that my time was up. Is that you, Sarah? I could lie. I could claim it was someone who looked like me, dismiss it as a coincidence. But the foundation of deception I'd built was already crumbling, and James deserved better than more lies. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's me." The silence that followed was even worse than his questions had been. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "You're Sarah Chen-Williams, as in the Chen-Williams Foundation that's paying for my medical school." "James? How long have you known?" he interrupted. "How long have you known that your family's foundation is funding my education?" "Since the night you told me about the scholarship," I admitted. "The night we were sitting in your car after you found out about my last name." "That was over a year ago." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You've known for over a year that I'm essentially living off your family's charity, and you never told me." "It's not charity, James. You earned that scholarship. The selection committee chose you based on your merits, your essay, your academic record." While I was sleeping with the daughter of the family funding it, he cut me off. "Do you have any idea how that looks? How that makes me feel?" I could hear the pain and humiliation in his voice, and it broke my heart. "James, please let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for over a year? How you've been watching me stress about money while sitting on a fortune? How every conversation I've had with my family about not being able to afford things has been happening while my girlfriend could buy and sell our entire neighborhood?" "I never wanted you to feel that way," I said desperately. "I fell in love with you before I knew about the scholarship connection, and by the time I realized it, things were already complicated." "Complicated," he repeated bitterly. "That's what you call lying to someone for a year. Complicated." "James, please, can we talk about this in person? I can explain everything." "I need time to think," he said. "I need time to figure out what's real and what's been a performance." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in my beautiful office, surrounded by the evidence of the wealth I'd hidden from the man I loved. Through my window, I could see the city James was somewhere in, probably walking the halls of Mass General, trying to process the fact that his girlfriend was not who he thought she was. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking him to let me explain, but there was no response. For 3 days, I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no response to my increasingly desperate attempts to reach him. Finally, on Thursday evening, he showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days, and when I opened the door, the expression on his face was carefully controlled in a way that terrified me. "Can I come in?" he asked formally. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "James, I've been trying to reach you." "I know." He sat down on the couch but didn't invite me to join him. I needed time to process everything, to figure out how much of our relationship has been real. I remained standing, afraid that sitting would make this feel too much like a normal conversation. "All of it has been real. My feelings for you, my love for you. None of that was connected to the foundation, or the money, or anything else. But you watched me stress about finances for months," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You watched me worry about debt, about whether I could afford to take you anywhere nice, about what would happen if I lost my scholarship, all while knowing you could solve every financial problem I have without even noticing the expense. I wanted to tell you." "When?" he interrupted. "When exactly were you planning to tell me? After we got married? After I finished medical school on your family's dime? When was I supposed to find out that my entire career has been subsidized by my girlfriend's trust fund?" The questions hung in the air, unanswerable because I didn't have good answers. I'd kept postponing the conversation, telling myself I was waiting for the right time, but the truth was, I'd been too afraid of exactly this reaction. "The scholarship review," I said suddenly. "When your funding was almost cut, that was because someone saw us together in the society pages and assumed you were getting financial support from me. I had to intervene to get it restored." James's face went pale. "You intervened. You fixed my scholarship problem. I couldn't let you take on debt because of an administrative error." "It wasn't an error," he exploded, standing up abruptly. "They were right to flag my file. I was getting support from you, just not in the way they thought. But you are the Chen-Williams Foundation, Sarah. Your family, your money, your decision about who deserves help and who doesn't. That's not how it works. Isn't it?" He began pacing, The careful control slipping. Isn't that exactly how it works? You decide I'm worthy of your romantic interest, so you make sure my scholarship stays in place. You decide I'm stressed about money, so you quietly solve my problems without telling me. You decide what I need to know and when I need to know it. James, you're making it sound calculating and manipulative, and it wasn't like that at all. Then what was it like? He demanded, turning to face me. Explain to me how watching your boyfriend worry about money while you sit on millions isn't manipulative. Explain to me how letting me think I earned my scholarship on merit alone when your family is funding it isn't deceptive. You did earn it on merit, I insisted. The scholarship selection process is completely independent. Is it? He asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the daughter of the foundation fell in love with one of their scholarship recipients and made sure he was taken care of. How is that any different from nepotism? I stared at him, seeing the pain and humiliation in his eyes, understanding for the first time how my attempts to protect our relationship had actually undermined everything we'd built together. In trying to keep money from becoming an issue between us, I'd made it the central issue. In trying to let him believe in his own merit, I'd made him question everything he'd achieved. I never wanted you to feel this way, I said quietly. I love you, James. That's the only truth that matters to me. But it's not the only truth that matters, he replied sadly. I've spent my entire life working toward becoming a doctor. Every grade, every test, every sacrifice my family made, it was all building toward this goal. And now I find out that the last 2 years have been funded by my girlfriend's family fortune. That doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. Doesn't it? He asked. How do I know what I would have achieved on my own? How do I know if I really deserved that scholarship, or if I was chosen because the selection committee knew it would please the founder's daughter? James, that's not. I don't know what's real anymore, Sarah. He moved toward the door, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I don't know if I earned my place in medical school, if I deserve the opportunities I've been given, or if I'm just the pet project of a wealthy family. You're not a pet project, I said desperately. You're the most dedicated, compassionate, intelligent person I know. Your patients adore you, your professors respect you. Because I'm a good medical student, or because everyone knows not to cross the Chen-Williams family. The question was so unfair, so removed from reality, that I felt anger flare alongside my desperation. That's ridiculous, and you know it. Your clinical performance has nothing to do with my family's influence. Do I know that? He asked, his hand on the door handle. A week ago, I thought I knew who my girlfriend was. I thought I knew how I was paying for medical school. I thought I knew what our relationship was built on. I was wrong about all of it. James, please don't go. Let's talk about this. Let me explain everything from the beginning. I can't, he said, not looking at me. I need to figure out who I am when everything I thought I knew turns out to be false. I need to understand what my life looks like when I strip away all the advantages I didn't know I was receiving. What does that mean? He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. It means I'm going to decline the scholarship. I'm going to take out loans and pay for the rest of medical school myself. And it means I need space to figure out whether James Richardson, the medical student, is real or just a creation of Chen-Williams family generosity. James, you can't be serious. The debt alone is my problem to solve, he finished. For the first time in 2 years, I want my problems to actually be mine. And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone in my expensive apartment with the devastating realization that in trying to protect our love from the complications of wealth, I had destroyed it completely. The weeks that followed James's departure were a masterclass in how completely one conversation could dismantle a life. I threw myself into work at the foundation, staying late into the evenings to avoid returning to an apartment that felt haunted by his absence. Every medical journal he'd left behind, every coffee mug he'd claimed as his favorite, every corner where we'd studied together served as painful reminders of what I'd lost. Patricia Webb found me in my office at nearly midnight on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the confrontation. She knocked gently on the doorframe, her expression a mixture of concern and professional discretion. "Sarah, honey, you need to go home," she said, taking in the chaos of my desk. grant applications scattered everywhere, a cold cup of coffee from hours earlier, and my laptop showing the foundation's scholarship database that I'd been obsessively reviewing. "I'm almost finished with the quarterly review," I lied, not looking up from the screen where James's scholarship file glowed accusingly. Patricia stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "This is about the Richardson situation, isn't it?" I finally met her eyes, and whatever she saw in my face made her sit down across from my desk with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. "He declined a scholarship," I said quietly, "officially withdrew from the program yesterday. Said he wanted to, quote, pursue alternative funding arrangements for the remainder of his medical education." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "That's over $60,000 he's walking away from. The debt he'll accumulate." "I know." I rubbed my temples, feeling the familiar ache of stress and sleepless nights. I tried to call him, to explain that declining the scholarship hurts the foundation's relationship with the medical school, that it creates complications for future applicants. But he won't answer my calls. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Patricia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Did your relationship with Mr. Richardson influence the foundation's scholarship decisions in any way?" The question I'd been dreading, asked by someone whose opinion mattered deeply to me. Patricia had worked with our family since I was in high school. She'd seen me grow from an idealistic teenager to the woman I was today, and her respect meant everything to me. "No," I said firmly. "James was selected before I knew who he was. The scholarship committee never knew about our relationship, and I never interfered with any decisions about his funding. Except when you asked me to kill the review last year," I winced. "That was different. The review was triggered by someone making assumptions about our relationship, not by any actual change in James's circumstances. I was protecting the integrity of the selection process." Patricia nodded slowly. "I believe you. But Sarah, you have to understand how this looks from the outside. A foundation heiress secretly dating a scholarship recipient, then using her influence to protect his funding. Even if your motives were pure, the optics are terrible." "I know." The admission felt like a physical weight on my chest. "I know I handled everything wrong. I thought I was protecting our relationship by keeping my identity separate from his academic life. But instead, I created exactly the kind of ethical gray area the foundation was designed to avoid." "What are you going to do?" It was a question I'd been grappling with for weeks. "I don't know. I can't undo the scholarship he's already received. I can't force him to accept continued funding. And I can't seem to convince him that his achievements are legitimate regardless of who he's dating." Patricia studied me carefully. "Can I offer some perspective from someone who's been watching this family navigate wealth and responsibility for 15 years? I nodded, desperate for any guidance that might help me understand how everything had gone so wrong. "Your grandfather built this foundation on the principle that merit should be rewarded, regardless of someone's connections or background. But Sarah, you can't separate yourself from your family's influence just because you want to. James Richardson is struggling with the reality that his merit became entangled with your wealth the moment you fell in love with him." "But that's not fair," I protested. "His achievements are his own." "Are they?" Patricia interrupted gently. "I'm not saying he doesn't deserve the scholarship. His academic record and personal essay were outstanding. But can you honestly say that your relationship didn't provide him with advantages he wouldn't have had otherwise?" I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it as I really considered her question. James had mentioned my connections when his scholarship was restored. He'd had access to my apartment for studying, my emotional support during stressful times, my casual suggestions about opportunities and programs that might interest him. Had I unconsciously provided him with advantages that other scholarship recipients didn't have? "I never meant for our relationship to affect his academic life," I said finally. "But it did," Patricia said gently. "And now he's trying to figure out who he is without those advantages, even if it means making his life significantly harder." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my heart stopped. "This is Emma Richardson. We need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow? It's important." I showed the message to Patricia, who frowned. "The sister? She's the one who figured out my identity. She's probably the reason James found out." I stared at the phone, wondering what Emma could possibly want to discuss. Should I meet with her? That depends, Patricia said carefully. Are you prepared for whatever she might have to say? The next day, I met Emma at a small cafe near Boston University, where she was finishing her senior year. She looked tired, older than her 22 years, and when she saw me approach her table, her expression was a mixture of determination and reluctance. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. I wasn't sure you would. What did you want to talk about? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. We both knew why we were here. Emma fidgeted with her coffee cup, clearly uncomfortable but committed to whatever she'd planned to say. I want to apologize for investigating you, for telling my parents about my suspicions, for contributing to whatever happened between you and James. I blinked, surprised by the directness of her apology. Emma, you were protecting your brother, I understand that. No, you don't, she said firmly. I was being paranoid and judgmental. I saw that you lived differently than we do, and instead of asking questions or trusting James's judgment, I went looking for reasons to distrust you. You weren't wrong about me hiding things, I pointed out, but I was wrong about why. Emma leaned forward, her expression intense. James told me everything after you two, after he found out about the foundation. He explained about the scholarship, about how you met, about how you never asked him for anything or made him feel like he owed you something. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Did he also tell you that he's giving up the scholarship? That he's taking on massive debt because he can't stand the idea that our relationship might have influenced his academic success? Emma's face crumpled. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Sarah, my brother is destroying his future because of something I started. The debt he's taking on, it's going to follow him for decades. It'll affect what kind of medicine he can practice, where he can work, whether he'll ever be able to afford a family of his own. I've tried to talk to him. He won't listen to anyone right now, Emma interrupted. He's convinced that accepting any help connected to you means he's not really earning his success. It's like he thinks he has to prove he deserves everything by making it as hard as possible for himself. We sat in silence for a moment, two women who both loved James Richardson struggling with the consequences of secrets and suspicions. There's something else, Emma said eventually. Something I found out that James doesn't know yet. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Emma pulled out her phone and opened an email. I've been doing more research about the Chen-Williams Foundation, not to find dirt on you, but to understand what James is giving up. Did you know that your foundation tracks the long-term outcomes of scholarship recipients? I nodded. We follow up with recipients for 10 years after graduation to measure the program's effectiveness. So you know that James isn't the only medical student in his class receiving Chen-Williams funding. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Emma showed me her phone screen. I contacted the Foundation's Public Relations Office, asked for general information about your medical education initiatives. They sent me a fact sheet. Sarah, the Chen-Williams Foundation provides funding to 12 students in James's medical school class alone. Partial scholarships, full scholarships, research grants. Your family is supporting nearly 10% of his entire class. I stared at the information, my mind reeling. I'd been so focused on James's individual scholarship that I'd never considered the broader scope of our medical education funding at his school. The foundation supported dozens of programs across multiple institutions. It was entirely possible, even likely, that James had been surrounded by Chen-Williams beneficiaries without any of them knowing it. Do you understand what this means? Emma continued. James is torturing himself over accepting help from your family, but he's been in classes with other students receiving the same help all along. He's not unique. He's not your pet project. He's just one of many students your foundation has chosen to support based on merit. The irony was devastating. James had convinced himself that our relationship had corrupted his academic achievements, but the truth was that he'd earned his place in a program that my family was already supporting extensively. His scholarship wasn't special treatment. It was part of a systematic effort to fund medical education that had nothing to do with our personal relationship. Does he know any of this? I asked. No, and I don't think his pride will let him hear it from me. But Sarah, maybe if it came from you, if you could show him that his scholarship is part of something bigger, something that existed long before you two met, maybe he'd understand that he's not compromising his integrity by accepting it. I looked at this young woman who had initially seen me as a threat to her family, who was now desperately trying to save her brother from his own stubborn pride. "Emma, why are you helping me? A month ago, you thought I was manipulating James." She smiled sadly. "Because a month ago, I watched my brother defend you against our entire family. I saw how much he loves you, how happy you make him. And now I'm watching him destroy that happiness because he'd rather suffer than accept help he thinks he doesn't deserve." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "I was wrong about you, Sarah. I let my own insecurities about money and class cloud my judgment. James is making the same mistake, but his version is going to cost him everything. His financial future, his relationship with you, maybe even his medical career if the debt becomes unmanageable. What do you want me to do?" "Fight for him," she said simply. "Don't let his pride destroy both of your futures. And maybe help him understand that accepting help doesn't make him weak. It makes him smart." As I left the cafe, Emma's words echoed in my mind. I had spent so much time trying to protect James from the complications of my wealth that I'd never helped him understand how to navigate those complications. I'd treated my family's money like a shameful secret instead of a tool that could be used responsibly and ethically. But James's reaction had shown me something important. He needed to feel like he'd earned his success independent of our relationship. And maybe, with Emma's research and some careful planning, I could find a way to give him that assurance while also saving him from financial ruin. The question was whether he'd be willing to listen to what I had to say, or if his pride had already burned all the bridges between us. Armed with Emma's research and a desperate determination to salvage what remained of my relationship with James, I spent the following week crafting a strategy that would address his concerns while protecting his pride. But my first attempt at contact was met with silence. My calls went straight to voicemail, my texts remained unread, and when I tried to approach him at the hospital, security informed me that Dr. Richardson had requested I not be allowed access to the medical floors. The rejection stung, but it also crystallized something important. James wasn't going to listen to anything I had to say until he was ready to hear it. And forcing the conversation would only reinforce his belief that I was using my position and resources to control situations that should be resolved through mutual respect and communication. So I decided to step back and focus on something I could control, ensuring that when James was ready to listen, I would have something meaningful to say. I spent hours with Patricia Webb, reviewing every aspect of the Foundation's medical education initiatives. What I discovered was both humbling and vindicating. The Chen-Williams Foundation had been supporting medical students at prestigious institutions for over 15 years, long before I'd ever met James Richardson. Our funding wasn't arbitrary or influenced by personal relationships. It was part of a carefully designed strategy to address the growing crisis of medical school debt. "Look at these numbers," Patricia said, spreading printouts across the conference table in my office. "In the past 5 years alone, we've provided over $8 million in medical education funding to 43 different institutions. We're not just helping individual students. We're helping to ensure that bright, compassionate people can become doctors regardless of their family's financial situation." I studied the data, seeing patterns I'd never noticed before. The foundation prioritized students from underserved communities, first-generation college graduates, and those committed to primary care or rural medicine. Exactly the kind of physicians the healthcare system desperately needed. "James fits our criteria perfectly," I said, running my finger down the selection requirements. Rural Connecticut background, first in his family to attend graduate school, expressed commitment to pediatric medicine. He would have been selected for this scholarship even if we'd never met. "More than that," Patricia added, pulling up another document on her laptop. "Look at the timing. His application was submitted and reviewed 6 months before you ever attended that charity gala where you met him. The selection committee made their decision based on his undergraduate research, his essay about his sister's cancer journey, and his academic performance. Your relationship didn't influence the process because you weren't even in the picture yet." The timeline was clear and undeniable. James had earned his scholarship on merit, full stop. But I knew that facts alone wouldn't be enough to convince him. He needed to understand not just what had happened, but why his assumptions about our relationship had been wrong from the beginning. "Patricia, I need to ask you to do something that might seem unusual," I said slowly. "I want to invite James to the Foundation's annual scholarship recipient gathering in November. The one where we recognize outstanding students and discuss the long-term impact of our programs. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Sarah, he's declined the scholarship. Technically, he's no longer eligible to attend that event. But he was a recipient for 2 years. He contributed to our program's success during that time. And more importantly, seeing the broader community of Chen-Williams scholars might help him understand that he's not an isolated case of special treatment. It might also backfire spectacularly, Patricia warned. If he feels ambushed or manipulated, then I'll have lost nothing more than I've already lost, I said quietly. But if there's a chance it might help him see the bigger picture, I have to try. The invitation was sent through official foundation channels, addressed to all former and current scholarship recipients in the Boston area. James's name was included on the list, but not highlighted in any way that would suggest personal involvement on my part. The letter was signed by Patricia as Director of Scholarship Programs, and it mentioned that the event would include presentations by successful physicians who had been Chen-Williams scholars early in their careers. I didn't know if James would attend, but 2 weeks before the event, Patricia informed me that he had RSVP'd with a brief email confirming his attendance. Meanwhile, October passed in a blur of foundation work and careful avoidance of places where I might accidentally encounter James. I threw myself into reviewing applications for the next round of scholarships, ensuring that our selection processes were as transparent and merit-based as possible. Every decision was documented, every criterion clearly defined, every potential conflict of interest identified and addressed. It was during this intensive review that I discovered something that would prove crucial to understanding James's perspective. While examining the files of past scholarship recipients, I found a pattern that had been invisible to me when I was focused solely on James's individual case. Patricia, look at this, I said, calling her into my office late one evening. I've been analyzing the outcomes of our medical school scholarships over the past decade. She leaned over my shoulder as I pointed to the data on my screen. Students who receive Chen-Williams scholarships consistently outperform their peers academically, have higher rates of completion, and are more likely to pursue careers in primary care or underserved communities. But here's what's interesting. The students who struggle most with the psychological aspects of receiving aid are those who come from backgrounds where accepting help is seen as weakness or failure. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Students from families where self-reliance is a core value would have more difficulty accepting what they perceive as charity. Exactly. And James comes from exactly that kind of background. His father has worked at the same high school for 25 years, never asking for special treatment or advancement. His mother has been dedicated to the same hospital for decades, earning respect through hard work and competence. They've built their lives on the principle that success comes through personal effort, not external assistance. I pulled up another document. But look at this. We have other scholarship recipients from similar backgrounds, and the ones who thrive are those who understand that accepting help doesn't diminish their achievements. It's the ones who can't reconcile merit with assistance who struggle, regardless of their academic capabilities. So what you're saying is that James's reaction isn't really about you or your relationship, Patricia said slowly. It's about his family's values conflicting with the reality of how success actually works in the modern world. Right. He's been raised to believe that real achievement is individual achievement. The idea that his success might be connected to external support, even merit-based support, feels like a contradiction of everything he's been taught to value. This insight helped me understand why James's reaction had been so extreme. It wasn't just about discovering that I was wealthy, or even about learning that his scholarship came from my family's foundation. It was about confronting the reality that success in medical school, and possibly in life, required accepting help and recognizing interdependence rather than relying solely on individual effort. As November approached, I found myself both dreading and anticipating the scholarship recipient gathering. It would be the first time I'd see James in over a month, and I had no idea how he would react to my presence. But it would also be an opportunity for him to see his scholarship in context, to understand that accepting help was not just normal but necessary for most students pursuing medical careers. The event was scheduled for the Saturday before Thanksgiving, which created an interesting backdrop for what I hoped would be a day of gratitude and perspective. Patricia and I spent weeks planning presentations that would highlight the community aspect of our scholarship program without seeming preachy or manipulative. Remember, she warned me the day before the event, Your role tomorrow is to observe and support, not to intervene. Let the program speak for itself. But even as I agreed to remain in the background, I was acutely aware that this might be my last chance to help James understand that his achievements were legitimate, regardless of where the funding had come from. If the event didn't help him see the bigger picture, I might have to accept that our relationship was truly over. The morning of the gathering, I woke early and spent extra time getting ready, choosing a professional but approachable outfit that would blend in with the other foundation staff. I wanted to be present for James if he needed me, but I didn't want my appearance to overshadow the real purpose of the event. As I drove to the downtown Boston hotel where the gathering would be held, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The deception, the discoveries, the painful conversations, and the weeks of separation had all contributed to bringing us to this point. In a few hours, I would see James again for the first time since he'd walked out of my apartment, and I would finally learn whether the gap between us could be bridged or if it had grown too wide to cross. The scholarship recipient gathering had become more than just a foundation event. It was a test of whether love and understanding could overcome pride and misperception. And as I pulled into the hotel parking garage, I realized that regardless of what happened with James, the past few months had taught me valuable lessons about wealth, responsibility, and the complex ways that privilege and merit intersect in the real world. Whether James was ready to learn those same lessons remained to be seen. The ballroom at the Boston Harbor Hotel buzzed with the energy of 50 young professionals, all connected by the thread of Chen-Williams Foundation support. As I stood near the registration table, greeting attendees and distributing name tags, I kept one eye on the entrance, waiting for James to arrive while trying to appear casually professional. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a pediatric surgeon who had been one of our first scholarship recipients 10 years earlier, was setting up his presentation materials at the front of the room. His success story was exactly the kind of inspiration I hoped would resonate with current students. Raised by a single mother in East Boston, first in his family to attend college, now leading a groundbreaking pediatric cardiac surgery program at Children's Hospital. "Sarah, you seem nervous," Patricia observed, appearing at my elbow with a coffee and a knowing look. "I'm fine," I lied, adjusting the foundation banner for the third time in 10 minutes. "You've rearranged that table display 4 times since I've been watching. Either you're having an obsessive-compulsive episode, or you're waiting for someone specific to arrive." Before I could respond, I saw him. James walked through the ballroom entrance wearing a navy suit I'd helped him pick out for his first major medical conference, his hair slightly tousled from the November wind outside. He moved with the confident stride I remembered, but there was something different about his posture, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The conversations around us became background noise. The bustling activity of the event registration dissolved into irrelevance. We stared at each other for perhaps 5 seconds that felt like an hour, and in his expression I saw a complex mixture of emotions: surprise, wariness, pain, and something that might have been longing. Then he looked away, turning his attention to the registration table where a volunteer was handing him a name tag and welcome packet. I watched as he read through the agenda, his eyebrows rising slightly when he saw the list of speakers and panelists. "Go talk to him," Patricia whispered. "Not yet," I replied, though every instinct screamed at me to cross the room and close the distance between us. "He needs to experience this without feeling like I'm managing his reaction." Instead, I forced myself to circulate through the room, greeting other scholarship recipients and listening to their stories. Maria Santos, a third-year medical student at Tufts, was telling a group about her research on healthcare disparities in Latino communities. David Kim, who was completing his residency in emergency medicine, described his plans to work in rural Alaska after graduation. Every conversation reinforced the same theme. These were exceptional students who were using their opportunities to make meaningful contributions to healthcare in their communities. I noticed James gravitating toward a cluster of students from his own medical school, including 2 I recognized from foundation files as current scholarship recipients. They were deep in conversation about their clinical rotations, and I could see James listening intently as they discussed their experiences and future plans. "You know, I almost didn't apply for the Chen-Williams scholarship," I heard one of them saying as I passed nearby. "I thought it was probably going to the connected kids." the ones whose parents knew somebody. But my advisor convinced me that the foundation really does focus on merit and potential. Best decision I ever made, another student replied. Without this funding, I would have been working nights in the ER just to pay tuition. Instead, I can focus on my studies and actually have time for research. It's completely changed my trajectory. James's expression was thoughtful as he absorbed these comments. I could see him processing the fact that his classmates had struggled with the same concerns about worthiness and merit that had tormented him, but they had chosen to embrace the opportunity rather than reject it. The formal program began with Patricia's welcome remarks, followed by Dr. Rodriguez's keynote presentation. As he spoke about his journey from struggling student to accomplished surgeon, he addressed directly the psychological challenges of accepting help. I want to talk about something that I know many of you have wrestled with, Dr. Rodriguez said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. The feeling that accepting scholarship money somehow diminishes your achievements or makes you less deserving of your success. I saw James straighten in his chair, his attention fully focused on the speaker. When I was in medical school, I worked with a therapist who told me something that changed my perspective completely. She said, "Marcus, the scholarship didn't get you into medical school. Your hard work and intelligence did that. The scholarship didn't perform your surgeries or pass your exams. You did that. What the scholarship did was remove financial barriers that might have prevented you from reaching your full potential." Dr. Rodriguez paused, making eye contact with various audience members. The Chen-Williams Foundation didn't make me a surgeon, but it made it possible for me to become the surgeon I was capable of being. And now, every child whose heart I repair benefits from that investment. The foundation's money didn't just help me, it helped every patient I'll treat for the rest of my career. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of someone wiping away tears. I glanced at James and saw that he was staring at his hands, his jaw working as he processed what he'd heard. The presentation continued with a panel discussion featuring 5 scholarship alumni at different stages of their careers. A family medicine physician talked about opening a clinic in rural Vermont. An emergency medicine resident described her plans to work with Doctors Without Borders. A psychiatrist explained how his foundation funding had allowed him to pursue specialized training in adolescent mental health. "I want to address something directly," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist. "I know some of you may feel uncomfortable about accepting help, especially if you come from families where self-reliance is highly valued. I felt that way too." James looked up sharply, and I realized Dr. Walsh was speaking directly to his experience. My father was a construction worker who prided himself on never asking anyone for anything. When I told him about the scholarship, his first reaction was to ask what strings were attached, what I'd have to do in return. He couldn't understand that sometimes merit is its own qualification. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more personal. "But here's what I learned. Accepting help when it's offered based on your potential isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And more importantly, it's not just about you. Every patient I help, every life I potentially save, every family I keep together, that's the real return on the foundation's investment." They didn't just invest in Jennifer Walsh, they invested in every person I'll help throughout my career. During the break that followed, I watched James approach Dr. Walsh and engage her in what appeared to be an intense private conversation. They spoke for nearly 15 minutes, and I could see from his body language that he was asking pointed questions and listening carefully to her responses. Then something unexpected happened. One of James's classmates, a woman named Rebecca Chen, no relation to my family, despite the surname, approached the microphone during the open discussion period. "I wanted to share something that I think is important," she began, her voice slightly nervous but determined. "I'm a third-year student at the same medical school as several other people here today, and I want to talk about the community aspect of being Chen-Williams scholars." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I first received my scholarship, I felt isolated and worried that other students would think I had some unfair advantage. But what I discovered is that there are Chen-Williams scholars throughout our program, and we've actually become an informal support network for each other." Rebecca gestured toward James and 2 other students. "We study together, we share resources, we help each other through difficult rotations." The scholarship didn't just provide funding. It connected us with peers who share similar values about service and community engagement. In a weird way, being Chen-Williams scholars has made us better medical students and better future doctors. I saw James nod slowly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked directly at me across the room. Our eyes met again, but this time his expression was different. Less guarded, more thoughtful, perhaps even slightly grateful. The event concluded with a reception where scholarship recipients could network and continue their conversations. I positioned myself near the dessert table, close enough to be available if James wanted to talk, but far enough away to avoid seeming pushy or manipulative. He approached me after about 20 minutes, moving through the crowd with purpose but not urgency. "Sarah," he said when he reached me, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello, James," I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I'm glad you came today." "Are you?" He studied my face carefully. Because for a while there I thought this might be an elaborate setup to make me feel guilty about declining the scholarship. Did it feel like a setup? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "It felt like perspective. Context I didn't have before." "Good," I said simply. "That's what I was hoping for." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, James spoke again. "Dr. Walsh told me something interesting. She said that struggling with accepting help is actually a sign of good character, that people who worry about whether they deserve assistance are usually the ones who deserve it most." "She's right," I said quietly. "The students who take scholarships for granted, who assume they're entitled to help, those aren't typically the ones who use the opportunities wisely." James nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Rodriguez said, about the scholarship removing barriers rather than providing advantages. I think I may have been looking at this all wrong." Before I could respond, Emma Richardson appeared at James's elbow, slightly out of breath as if she'd been hurrying. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, giving me a meaningful look before turning to her brother. "How was the presentation?" "Eye-opening," James replied, still looking at me. "Emma, did you know about this event when you met with Sarah a few weeks ago?" Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "I may have mentioned to someone that you might benefit from some perspective on the scholarship program." James looked between his sister and me, understanding dawning in his expression. "You two planned this." "We planned nothing," I said quickly. "Emma suggested that you might benefit from seeing the broader context of the scholarship program. The invitation was sent through normal foundation channels to all former recipients in the area. You chose to come, but you hoped I would," he said. "Yes," I admitted. "I hoped you would." For the first time in weeks, James smiled. Not the full, warm smile I remembered, but a small, genuine expression that suggested possibility. "Well," he said slowly, "I'm glad I did." The days following the scholarship gathering passed in a cautious dance of rebuilt communication. James and I exchanged a few text messages. Nothing deep or emotional, just practical updates about how we were doing and whether we might be ready to have a longer conversation. It felt like the tentative first steps of people learning to trust each other again after a significant betrayal, even though we both knew the betrayal had been unintentional. Emma had texted me privately after the event. "Thank you for not giving up on him. He's been miserable for weeks, even though he'd never admit it." The breakthrough came 3 days before Thanksgiving when James called me, his voice hesitant but determined. "Sarah, I've been thinking about everything. The scholarship, our relationship, the things those doctors said at the gathering. I think I owe you an apology." "James, you don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I let my pride and my assumptions about wealth and merit cloud my judgment about who you are and what our relationship meant. I accused you of manipulation when you were actually trying to protect both of us from exactly the kind of complications I created by walking away." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "You were hurt and confused. Anyone would have reacted strongly to discovering their girlfriend had been hiding something so significant. Maybe, but not everyone would have thrown away a 2-year relationship and $50,000 in scholarship funding without at least trying to understand the bigger picture first." He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Dr. Walsh said something that really stuck with me. She said that sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is remove obstacles from your path without taking credit for your destination." She sounds like a wise woman. She is, and she helped me realize that you've been doing exactly that, removing financial obstacles so I could focus on becoming the doctor I want to be without ever making me feel diminished or dependent. We talked for over an hour that night, finally having the honest conversation about money, merit, and mutual respect that we should have had months earlier. James explained his family's deeply ingrained beliefs about self-reliance, and how discovering the truth about my background had felt like learning that his achievements were somehow illegitimate. I shared my own struggles with wealth, the isolation, the constant questioning of people's motives, the difficulty of forming relationships where money wasn't a complicating factor. "I want to try again," he said as our conversation wound down. "If you're willing. But this time, no secrets between us. Full transparency about everything. Your family's business, my concerns about accepting help, all of it." "I'd like that too," I said, relief flooding through me. "But James, I need you to understand something. My family's wealth isn't going to disappear. There will always be situations where I could easily solve problems that seem insurmountable to you. I need to know that you can accept help when it's offered without feeling like it diminishes who you are." "I'm learning," he said quietly. "The scholarship gathering showed me that accepting support from people who believe in your potential isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And more than that, it's a responsibility to use those opportunities well." The next day, James called with a surprising request. "I want to talk to your parents," he said without preamble. "About what?" "About the foundation, about their work, about why they choose to fund medical education. I realize I've been accepting their generosity for 2 years, without ever understanding their motivations, or thanking them properly." I was touched by the gesture, but also nervous about how my parents would react to meeting the young man who had inadvertently caused their daughter weeks of heartbreak. "Are you sure? They can be intimidating when they're protecting me." "I'm sure. And Sarah, I want to reinstate my scholarship for the final semester. Not because I can't handle the debt, but because declining it was disrespectful to everything your family is trying to accomplish." That conversation led to an invitation that surprised everyone. My parents asked James to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. "We'd like to meet the young man who's captured our daughter's heart so completely," my mother said when she called with the invitation. "And we'd like to discuss his plans for completing medical school." Which brought us to Thanksgiving Day, where I stood in my childhood home's kitchen, watching my mother put the finishing touches on a feast that could feed 20 people, even though only 6 would be joining us. My parents, James, myself, and Emma, who had asked if she could come along for moral support. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked, appearing beside me as I arranged flowers in a vase. "Terrified," I admitted. "My parents can be wonderful, but they're also very protective, and they know James hurt me, even if it wasn't entirely his fault." "He's nervous too," she said, glancing toward the living room where James was having what appeared to be an intense conversation with my father about healthcare policy. "He's been researching your family's business for days, trying to understand the scope of what they do." My mother emerged from the kitchen, looking elegant in a simple dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but radiating the same warmth that had made me feel safe throughout my childhood. "Emma, dear, would you help me with the wine selection? I want something that pairs well with turkey but isn't so formal that your brother feels like we're putting on airs." As Emma followed my mother to the wine cellar, I realized this was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that characterized how my family approached relationships. They wanted James to feel comfortable and valued, not overwhelmed by displays of wealth. The dinner conversation started cautiously, with polite questions about James's studies and career plans. But as the evening progressed, it evolved into something much more meaningful. "James, I understand you're interested in pediatric medicine," my father said, refilling wine glasses around the table. "Yes, sir. My sister's experience with cancer when we were children really shaped my perspective on healthcare. I want to work with kids who are facing serious medical challenges." "That's exactly the kind of commitment we hope to see from scholarship recipients," my mother added. "Tell me, what do you think are the biggest barriers preventing talented students from pursuing medical careers?" James launched into a thoughtful analysis of medical school debt, the pressure to pursue high-paying specialties to pay off loans, and the way financial stress could impact academic performance. As he spoke, I watched my parents exchange glances. Not the worried looks I'd feared, but the approving expressions of people recognizing intelligence and passion. "You know," my father said when James finished, "you've just articulated the exact reasoning behind our medical education initiatives. We started funding medical students because we realized that debt was forcing too many good people out of primary care and public service. The Chen-Williams Foundation has supported over 300 medical students in the past 15 years, my mother added. We track their career outcomes, and the data is remarkable. Students who receive funding are twice as likely to work in underserved communities, and 3 times more likely to pursue research that benefits public health." James set down his fork, his expression serious. "I need to apologize to both of you. I declined my scholarship funding for the final semester because I was struggling with personal issues related to accepting help. But I realize now that my decision was selfish. It wasn't just about me, it was about all the patients I might help throughout my career. We know about the decline," my father said gently, "and we understand why you made that choice. But we're glad you've reconsidered." "Actually," James said, glancing at me nervously, "I was hoping to discuss something with you. I want to reinstate my scholarship, but I also want to do something more." He took a deep breath, clearly gathering courage for whatever he was about to propose. "I've been working on a research project about medical education debt and its impact on career choices in primary care. I'd like to submit it to your foundation as a policy paper, and I'd like to volunteer with your scholarship selection committees. I want to help identify students who could benefit from the same opportunities I've received." My mother's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That sounds like exactly the kind of initiative we love to support. Would you be willing to present your research at our next board meeting?" "I'd be honored," James replied. As the conversation continued, I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of rightness that had been missing for months. Watching James engage with my parents as equals, seeing him embrace rather than resist the opportunity to contribute to something larger than himself, I realized this was what partnership was supposed to look like. Not him accepting my world or me adapting to his, but both of us finding ways to build something together that honored both our values and our capabilities. After dinner, we moved to the living room where Emma and my mother had become engrossed in a conversation about nursing programs and healthcare administration. James and my father were discussing the economics of medical education reform. And I found myself sitting quietly, marveling at how natural it felt to have everyone together. "Sarah," my mother said during a lull in conversation, "why don't you show James the library? I think he'd be interested in your grandfather's medical equipment collection." I led James through the house to my grandfather's study, which my parents had preserved exactly as he'd left it when he passed away 5 years earlier. The walls were lined with books on medicine and engineering, and display cases held examples of the medical devices his company had manufactured over the decades. "This is incredible," James said, examining a vintage cardiac monitor from the 1960s. "Your grandfather really built all this from nothing?" "He came here with a degree in electrical engineering and a dream of making medical care more accessible through better technology," I explained. "He used to say that every device they built could potentially save someone's life, so they had a responsibility to make them as good as possible." James nodded thoughtfully. "I can see where you get your sense of responsibility about the foundation's work." "James, there's something I want to ask you," I said, settling into one of the leather chairs near the window. "Are you really okay with all of this? The wealth, the foundation, the way it complicates things?" He sat down across from me, considering the question seriously. "I'm learning to be okay with it. What I realized at the scholarship gathering is that your family's money isn't just about privilege. It's about power to create opportunities for other people. And that's something I can respect and want to be part of. Even if it means people might always wonder whether your success is your own or connected to your relationship with me. Let them wonder," he said with a smile. "I know what I've accomplished, and I know what kind of doctor I'm going to be. Anyone who wants to reduce that to being the, quote, scholarship boyfriend doesn't understand what real merit looks like." As we prepared to leave that evening, my parents pulled me aside for a private moment. "We like him," my mother said simply. "He's thoughtful, principled, and clearly devoted to you. But more than that, he understands what we're trying to accomplish with the foundation. He'll be a good partner for you. my father added. Not just romantically, but in the work you're going to do together. I can see him helping to shape the foundation's future in meaningful ways. The drive back to Boston was quiet, both James and Emma processing everything that had happened. As we pulled into my apartment building's parking garage, Emma turned to me from the back seat. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on us, for helping James understand that accepting help isn't the same as accepting charity, and for showing our family what generosity really looks like." After Emma headed to her hotel, James and I found ourselves alone in my apartment for the first time in months. The space felt different now, not haunted by secrets and deception, but filled with possibility for the future we were going to build together. "So where do we go from here?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch where we'd had so many difficult conversations. "Forward," I said, taking his hand. "With honesty, with mutual respect, and with the understanding that love sometimes means accepting help from the people who care about you most." "I can live with that," he said, pulling me closer. "In fact, I think I'd like to spend the rest of my life learning how to do it better." As I settled into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of his presence and the promise of our rebuilt trust, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The gold digger accusations, the scholarship complications, the painful weeks of separation, all of it had been necessary to help us understand what we really meant to each other and what kind of partnership we wanted to build. James Richardson wasn't just accepting my family's money, he was embracing the opportunity to be part of something larger than himself. And I wasn't just sharing my wealth. I was sharing my purpose, my values, and my vision for how privilege could be used responsibly. The Thanksgiving dinner had ended with gratitude, but it had begun something even more important. A relationship built on truth, mutual respect, and the understanding that the best kind of love doesn't eliminate challenges. It gives you a partner strong enough to face them together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.